Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. Today we're waking up with watches and everything is for sale. Reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com for your purchase and pricing questions. I try to list all the prices of these watches except when I'm not allowed to pick them up publicly, but I can send them to you by email. So email me at tmosso at thewatchbox.com if you wish to buy, trade, or sell a watch. We love to acquire inventory. We pay cash, we pay fast, no upper limit on value paid. We will buy your entire collection. To buy, trade, or sell, email tmosso at thewatchbox.com. All right, let's jump straight in. I promised you a Rolex, and here it is. Rolex Datejust 41 in full stainless steel, 41 millimeters in diameter. You can see that the watch features an Oyster bracelet, black lacquer dial, white gold indices, and Rolex crown. Now, this is one of the loomed models, which makes it a very versatile watch, as it's anti-magnetic, shock resistant, 100 meters water resistant, and very luminescent. Easy to read at night. The watch is also quite slender and broad, with the Oyster always being more of a cushion case profile than a true round watch. Pop open the clasp, throw it on my wrist. My wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference, and you get a good sense of this watch. It is broad. There's no getting away from that. And I wouldn't recommend it for a watch smaller than 14 centimeters circumference, but you can see that it is broad and flat, which gives it a handsome aspect ratio and a handsome saucer-like appearance. It's a watch that covers a lot of real estate, and the timepiece is wonderfully versatile. I would recommend it as your sports watch, your dress watch, and if you are so inclined, as your only watch. This would be a great choice. 70-hour power reserve, automatic winding, chronometer certified, and of course it features hacking seconds and a quick set date. Now let's jump way upscale. Another way you can go swimming with your luxury sports watch, your high luxury sports watch. This is the hypercar of sports watches. Greubel Forsey Balancier 100 meters water resistant. We have green rubber inserts on the flank, on the crown shoulder, as well as the strap, which you can see is integrated into the case. The case is a little bit odd to measure. It's 44.8 millimeters across, but then actually end to end across the wrist, it's also 44.8 millimeters. Now when you throw it on the wrist, again, my wrist is 16 centimeters. You can see it wears well, and the back of the case has a nice curve to it that helps to arc around the wrist, and you can really see quite well from this angle how this thing is nowhere near the edge of my wrist, making it viable even on a lady's wrist. This is a compact watch. It's not terribly thin, but it is very light in grade 5 titanium, and it's not just the case that's grade 5 titanium. The bridges and the plates are also of titanium. You can see that you have barrels, 2 barrels stacked to give the watch a 72-hour power reserve, an enormous balance beating away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. You can see it as a free-sprung architecture adjusted in 6 positions. Very, very tough, but also large. Taking the bolts out of the free airstream, it helps to reduce the aerodynamic drag on the balance. And then there's a handmade overcoil hairspring, so the watch keeps the same time in any position relative to gravity. Now you can see that there's a good deal of hand finishing, such as on the edges of the bridges. There's mirror polishing. You can see it on the top of the balance cock as well as on the stud holder. All of the screw heads black polished with chamfered slots in circumference. You can see inboard there's a minute track, against which to more easily read the time. Flip the watch over and you can see some nods to the pocket watch era of watchmaking in La Chaux-de-Fonds. That's where Greubel Forsey is based. With about 100 employees, they make 120 to 150 watches a year, so the ratio is very low because of the amount of fine finish involved. You can see that this is one of 8. It is a limited edition, very exclusive, even by Greubel standards. The bridges are media blasted internally, then they have a raised, relieved, and black polished channel across their edges, and then you can see that there's mirrored anglage on the edge of each bridge. Now you can also see that the pivot jewels are set in golden chaton. This is how watches used to be assembled in the pocket watch era, because tools of sufficient precision to set jewels into bridges had not yet been developed, so they were pressed into golden chaton, which were then themselves fit into the bridges. Details that I love, if you look closely at the wheels, you can see that their interior circumference as well as spokes have been beveled. That's the level of detail that most brands don't bother to give you. We give you, on Greubel Forsey, a full deploying clasp for a sports watch, as it should be. And if you're ever wondering what the graphics mean, like what is all of this verbiage around the side, that is just the philosophy of Greubel and Forsey en français. Now jumping real quick to another sports watch. We're starting heavy on the sports watches, but from a lot of smaller brands once we get Rolex out of the way. You can see this is the Moser Streamliner Flyback Funky Blue. It was the follow-up to the gray Fume Dial limited edition in 2020. 42.3 millimeters in stainless steel. It's 120 meters water resistant. It is a flyback chronograph, and it has central seconds as well as minutes, and it's instantaneous jumping minutes, which preserves the dial. The dial has no date. It's very clean. All the hands are coaxial. You can see it is what they call funky blue. That is a signature Moser color. I should also mention, though 120 meters water resistant, it's different than others that are rated to that depth in that you can use the chronograph pushers while submerged. Now we have that fade from blue at the center to almost black at the edge, and a staggered track for reading the chronograph seconds and fractions, known as the racing dial, borrowed from 1970s chronographs that used the same practice. There's global light, luminescent ceramic material on the hands, and you can see that quite well right here. Jumping back real quick, the watch has central register minutes and seconds, and of course it is a flyback, so you can reset it and restart it without first stopping it. Turning it all over, you can see the HMC 902 on the reverse side, which is actually the Chronograph 6361. Now it's an automatic, and the rotor is hidden underneath the dial. So the case back is unmarred by a winding bridge or a rotor. It is a column wheel chronograph and has a chronograph clutch that fuses the best elements of the vertical clutch with little play with the beauty of the lateral clutch, as well as the lateral clutch's resistance to skipping under shock, and it is decorated to a very high standard. Automatic winding with a 54-hour power reserve. You can see the bracelet is beautiful, organic, almost like the segmented back of some sort of Cretaceous-era seafloor dweller. It's very tightly constructed with no visible gaps between the links, and you can see no daylight showing. Polished internally and satinated externally. It has a nice polished bevel down the side. The watch is large. I would not recommend it for a wrist smaller than 15 centimeters circumference because it is so broad. The Streamliner center seconds is 40 millimeters and a lot thinner, and I would recommend that watch for a smaller wrist. I say you've got to have a wrist my size or fairly close, not much smaller, though larger is welcome, as this watch wears beautifully on a larger wrist, and it's nicely counterweighted with a substantial bracelet and double deployant trigger actuated clasp. Okay, another brand we don't often discuss here. Now, we discuss Moser all the time, but not Urban Jurgensen. This is the Urban Jurgensen 1, and you can see that it's a 2019 launch into the integrated bracelet steel sports watch category. It has a tonneau style case. It has a Vogue or wave style pattern on the nickel anthracite dial, and we will do a quick loom shot so you get a good sense of how well loomed the watch is. It is quite well loomed. It features a manufacturer caliber P4 automatic on the reverse side. Water resistant down to 120 meters. It's a 3-day power reserve. It is beautifully hand decorated, and it's got a sports watches layout. Let me see if I can get a little bit closer. In that the balance bridge is dual anchored, a full balance bridge anchored on both sides with a free sprung balance. The balance beats away at 21,600 vibrations per hour. Again, 3-day power reserve, hacking seconds, quick set date, automatic winding, 120 meters water resistant, and handsome hand finishing. As you'd see, the edge of the rotor as well as the edge of the bridges with a nice mirrored bevel, as well as fire blued screws. And if you look carefully, you can see that there is a Côte de Soleil across the bridges. It's not parallel Côte de Genève. They actually emanate from an imaginary center point atop the balance. It's a very good-looking watch. It does wear a little bit larger than its rated size. Though rated as a 41, I'd say it wears a little bit more like a 42 or a 43, and that's down to the fact that the bracelet doesn't want to collapse straight down. Normally, with a bracelet that you could pull straight down from the lugs, you can wear it on a smaller wrist, but here you've got that virtual width. That said, the bracelet is of extraordinary quality. I'd compare it to the finest in the business, and that means Rolex and Audemars Piguet. And I'm actually going to show you a Patek bracelet a little later on today that isn't quite as nicely made as this Urban Jurgensen. It's a large watch, and I would not recommend it for wrists smaller than 15 centimeters. I'm pushing the limits as is, though you can see the watch is not thick, so it does fit underneath the cuff. A really special piece that you can get for well under $30,000, despite being extensively hand-finished and made in hundreds, not thousands of pieces per year. Plus, Kari Voutilainen just bought this brand, so it has a bright future, both for service and parts as well as new model launches. So you can sort of get on board the way Kari did with Urban Jurgensen by purchasing this one automatic. Jumping back to bigger brands, this is an interesting watch because it is a rare admission by Rolex Tudor that someone else can do the job better. Launched in 2017, this is the Tudor Blancpain chronograph, 41 millimeters in stainless steel. It uses a modified Breitling B01 caliber, so it uses the movement that Breitling first launched in 2009 on the Chronomat B01. Now, Tudor does make some changes to it. They use their own free sprung architecture for the balance. They fit their own silicon anti-magnetic hairspring, And they changed the chronograph register so it reads 45 rather than timing the Breitling's 30 minutes. So you get a 45-minute register, a little bit more helpful. All the other elements are very much Tudor. You have the no-guard crown profile, the Tudor rose on the crown, the Tudor shield on the dial. So this is the pre-1968 logo for Tudor. This is the post-1968 logo. That's characteristic of the Breitling-powered and in-house Tudor watches. It's got snowflake-style hands, tribute to the Tudor subs from 1968 through the mid-70s. We've got a tachymeter outboard for gauging things moving very fast, as we have calibration between 560 units. The crystal is a sapphire, though it has a dramatic box section profile to look like a plexiglass. We have the bevels on the lugs reminding us of the era when Tudor and Rolex shared cases, and those cases were hand-beveled. Chronometer certified, 70-hour power reserve, automatic winding, very shock tolerant, highly anti-magnetic. Features both a stop seconds functionality and a quick set for the date that allows you to rapidly cycle the date. The chronograph is a vertical clutch with a column wheel, which means it makes use of all the latest architectural developments. The column wheel ensuring it is very, very crisp to feel and hear, and then the vertical clutch ensuring it starts without any jump, and you can leave it running full time. That's another advantage of the vertical clutch. The watch is not a dive watch. It is a sports chronograph, making this something of Tudor's tribute to a Daytona-like watch. And it does have that lovely look with a vintage inverse panda dial color scheme that works well. On my wrist, it's large. Again, I would recommend, because it is big, you're probably going to want to wear it on a wrist of 15 centimeters circumference or larger, though it doesn't project outwardly across my wrist. It doesn't project out beyond the edge of my wrist, and you can see that. So a 14 centimeter circumference wrist could probably wear it, but I think for aesthetical purposes, you want to be around my size or you want to be a little bit bigger. Let's do a lume shot real quick here. There you go, plenty of lume. Green as opposed to Rolex blue chromalite. Now we're jumping back to the world of Rolex, and we're turning back the clock to 1981. 6.5 million serial number, Rolex GMT-Master. Note, GMT-Master, not Master II. 16753, a two-tone on a factory Jubilee bracelet. You can see it's a combination of yellow gold and steel. The watch is driver quality, meaning it's a watch that's been worn and should probably be worn. It's not in mint condition, nor is it being presented as such, though you can see that some elements of the original factory bevels are still intact on the lugs, and the lugs are more chewed than they are refinished. They've been worn, but not worn out or worn through. As you can see, the spring bars are nowhere near protruding from the edges of the lugs, and that's usually the sign that they've been refinished too much. These have just been worn down by use. You can see that the watch has a wonderfully preserved dial. This is sometimes called a nipple dial or a dimple dial. It features those distinctive cabochon-style hour indices. It's a lovely, rich black lacquer that's held up beautifully over the years. Tritium, factory tritium. Take a quick look and you can see everything is dead as a doornail. It is original. Tritium hands as well as tritium dial. It's often said that the key part of any collectible Rolex is the dial, followed shortly after by the bezel, and this watch has both of them in wonderful shape. Now you may learn to use this bezel because the GMT Masters are different than the Master IIs. This model was made from 1981 to 1988, and it features a single time zone. So you actually would have set the watch back in the day. It was released in 1954 for Pan Am pilots, but you would have set the watch so that the 24-hour hand kept Greenwich Mean Time, and then as you approach your airport or destination, you use the bezel in conjunction with the known GMT offset of that destination to find the time and then read that time against the 24-hour hand. Now, one of the interesting quirks of this watch, which uses Rolex transitional caliber, a 3075, is that it features both a quick set and a hacking seconds function. And it's very rare to find a quick set on a GMT Master or GMT Master II. The Master IIs don't have a conventional quick set. You have to set the date using the hour hand. And then the previous GMT Masters before this generation didn't have a quick set because it wasn't compatible with their movement architecture. So this was one of only a handful of GMT references ever to have both the hacking and the quick set. Of course, there was also the 16700, which went out of production in the late 90s, but you just had that window in the 80s and the 90s when you actually had GMT Masters with both features. Now, the bracelet's in good shape. It's got a little bit of Rolex rattle. You can see it has play, but the structural integrity is such that you should have no doubts about the security of wearing it on the wrist. The Jubilee bracelet gives these watches a different look, and for a long time it was a factory option. It is once again a factory option, especially in conjunction with the black dial, the gold applications, and the gold bezel and crown. This is a dressier type of GMT. It is quite flat. It does have a plexiglass crystal and tritium, so it's one of those transitional models that has some characteristics of a modern Rolex and some characteristics of a vintage Rolex. Rolling from Rolex to IWC, this was a big debut back in 2020, a more wearable Big Pilot's watch. This is the Big Pilot 43 from IWC, and a lot has changed here. First, like the original BE, it has no date. Now, you can also see it's more wearable on a small wrist. Key dimensions, it's 13.8 millimeters thick. From lug tip to lug tip, it's 52.7 millimeters and has a 21 millimeter spacing between the lugs. No date, blue dial, sunburst, no nonsense. Let's throw it quickly underneath the light. Charge it up, loom shot. This is something that sets it apart from a lot of the other Big Pilots. The entire dial is loomed, not just the corners and the hands. So it is a more legible watch in the dark. It's also a more water-resistant watch, as the now 43 millimeter rather than 46 millimeter Big Pilot is 100 meters water-resistant. And on this full factory bracelet, it's a lot easier to just jump in the water wearing it like this than on the more common calfskin aviators bracelet. Now, there is a new feature for this year. Built into the bracelet and the straps, there's a quick release system. And this is important because the release technology is built into the bracelet or the strap, leaving you with a conventional spring bar and a 21 millimeter spacing, which means that you can put any aftermarket strap you want on this. Unlike, say, a Cartier Roadster or an IWC Aquanaut, you're not frozen into using a factory solution. Although the factory solution is easy to use and handsome, you have a flexibility that's rarely seen with quick release systems. Now, if you look on the underside, you can see, as with the IWC GST bracelet, every individual link is removable. So you can remove every single link on both sides, and that'll help you fine tune the fit. You can also see that because this is the Brogioli bracelet clasp system, you have that roughly 10 millimeters of push button micro adjustment built in. So you've got a single fold with twin trigger release, and then you press the IWC logo for micro adjustment. Taking a look at the case back, this is reference, or I should say movement reference. Let's get a little bit closer. Movement reference 85100. It has a ceramic IWC pawl-based Peloton winding system. It's adjusted in 5 positions. It has a 60-hour power reserve and a stop seconds function. So it is a very modern movement in architecture. Very tough, good to look at, mostly machine finished. But the 60-hour power reserve, the hacking seconds, the free-sprung architecture, the Peloton winding system mean that it is rugged, efficient, and includes a lot of IWC design and engineering DNA. Okay. Let's take a look at a bracelet that I compared unfavorably to the Urban Jurgensen. No one is going to forestall a purchase of an Aquanaut or Nautilus because of something I say about a sub-$30,000 Urban Jurgensen, but take my word for it, in terms of the way it is built, this bracelet looks and feels more expensive than the bracelet on the Aquanaut. Now, there's some elements where Aquanaut has an advantage. For example, the Aquanaut is only 8.5 millimeters thick, and you can see just how much thinner it is than the Urban Jurgensen when I put the two together. So I'm not beating up on Patek Philippe here. I'm just saying the Urban Jurgensen does have some advantages in power reserve, movement architecture. It has hacking seconds, something the Patek does not have, but the Patek is the gold standard for luxury sports watches. Alongside the Nautilus, the Royal Oak, and increasingly the Vacheron Overseas, this is the top of the class. This is the Premier League. And you can see that the watch wears beautifully elegant on the wrist, even though I've always felt that the Aquanaut seems a bit awkward on a bracelet. The way to buy any watch is on the bracelet and then accessorize with a strap, not the other way around, because buying the bracelet as an accessory would be ruinously expensive. And I should mention, if you want to swim with this watch, it does make sense to use the bracelet. Even a rubber strap on an Aquanaut in time will wear down, and the bracelet never will. Now, the watch has a lovely dial with a geosphere cut, and you can see that, as with the IWC Big Pilot 43, the whole dial is loomed, both indices and numerals, and you can see that well from this angle. It's actually better loomed than a Nautilus. The dial also has a gradient, a very subtle one, fading from sort of gray silver at the center to almost black at its edge. Screw down crown, 120 meters, water resistant. It has a anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, which gives it a leg up in anti-magnetism over the Urban Jurgensen. It's also finished to a somewhat higher standard than the Urban Jurgensen, although it's very close. Patek does have the advantage. Now, the watch also has much thinner movement, which helps the case to be thinner, and again, all of that recommends it. It's also considerably narrower across the wrist. Remember what I mentioned about the bracelet of the Urban Jurgensen wanting to flare out? Well, this is an example of one that you can pull straight down out of the lugs, and I'll demonstrate with the Urban one more time what I mean about bracelet flare. I can't pull straight down out of the lugs. They want to arc out. That said, there are some advantages here. The bracelet that I said feels more substantial also includes removable links fixed by screws, whereas the Patek Philippe uses a pin sleeve situation, which I consider to be less than optimal on an expensive watch. So Urban Jurgensen, surprisingly competitive, just it's a much bigger watch. That's where it falls down compared to the Patek. Now, you can hardly ever mention the Aquanaut without mentioning the Nautilus, but this ain't just another 5711. No, this is a 5712G. Same size, 40 millimeters, still quite thin at 8.8 millimeters thick. White gold. This is actually gray gold since it never needs to be plated with rhodium. It's white all the way through. The dial also is silver metallic, but lighter. This one doesn't have as much of a gradient from the center to the edge, and you can see it has white gold indices, white gold hands, and a lot going on, as we've got a combination of a power reserve, 48 hours, small seconds, and then coaxial moon phase and date. Now, the watch includes 60 meters of water resistance with a screw-down crown, so that's fine for surface swimming, but you're going to want to put it on the factory rubber strap rather than this factory leather strap if you do want to take it swimming. It uses a micro-rotor automatic that makes it thinner than it would otherwise be with something like a 26 330 or 324. So the nice thing about a micro rotor is that it keeps the watch thin while still giving you the convenience of automatic winding, and it also gives you the broad display vista of a manual wind movement because the winder and the winding bridge aren't blocking your view. It's all in the same plane as the other clockwork. Throw this watch on the wrist, you can see it has a rather attractive white gold deployant clasp, and it's a flat and comfortable timepiece. You'll also note that the case itself is rather spare. There's not a lot to it, and it's short across the wrist, and for the most part, you can pull that strap straight down. So this will wear well on any wrist that'll wear a 5711 well. I do consider it to be a unisex option just because of how well the strap fits. I think you could get away wearing this watch on a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, and it fits quite easily underneath the strap. We'll do a quick loom shot here. There you go. All right, in the realm of sports watches, they don't come much more hardcore than this. Bethune launched the DB28GS Grand Bleu in 2019, 44 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. It's surprisingly thin at 13 millimeters thick, and it features the company's signature spring-loaded floating lugs that have a variable geometry to ensure a good fit. Unconventionally, the watch is rated to 105 meters of water resistance, but more is always better. You can see on the reverse side, the display case back highlights the beautifully finished underlying power reserve mechanism. So the power reserve indicator itself is actually hiding off to the side of the dial. You can see it underneath my fingers. 5-day manual wind power reserve. Actually 6 at the extremity. So the watch will display a reduction in power reserve for 2 reasons. One is that you use the watch under conventional circumstances, and the other is when you do this. Take note, there is a lume on the dial, but then there's also LED dynamo lighting. As you can see, the power reserve is slowly retreating over here at 9 o'clock as the mainspring barrels operate the dynamo that lights these LEDs. You can also see that the bezel is transparent, so you can view the backlit numerals as you operate the dive bezel, and there's a minute repeater governor that slows the release of energy from the mainspring barrels, so that's how that works. The timepiece does have immaculate hand finishing. Just as I tilt the watch through the light, you can see how much black polish there is. Now, this is generally a very delicate type of finishing that's applied sparingly on mass-produced watches because it's so time-consuming to do. Well, when you're only making 200 watches a year like de Bethune is, you can spend the time to black polish huge expanses of the dial. You can also apply microlight engraving to the case flank, as well as the deltoid barrel bridge and a plate that covers the main plate. You can also appreciate there's a lot of technology in here, from their patented twin self-adjusting barrels, to their triple parachute shock protection system, to their process for fire bluing titanium, to their hairspring, which is two elements clamped together and hand-shaped. It's flat like a flat hairspring and shock resistant like a flat hairspring, but it has the concentric breathing qualities of an overcoil. They also have their own titanium balance. You can see it's blued titanium with white gold masses. That has advantages for resistance to both temperature-induced timing deviation and bumps and concussions on the wrist, because maximum mass is concentrated in the rim by putting the white gold masses outboard and then making the rest of titanium. So you've got a power reserve indicator, LED dynamo lighting, a unidirectional diving bezel. It's one of the rare center-second DB28 models. You can also see that there is a lot of traditional fine finish here, as you'll see satination on the wheels and then mirrored beveling or anglage on the edge of the bridges. So while the watch is avant-garde, make no mistake, it is traditionally crafted. The watch also includes a deployant clasp, which you can see right here. Let me get the strap minder off of that. And then the watch includes a factory strap, which is quite nice. This is the most attractive factory strap I've seen on the Grand Bleu yet. You can see it's vulcanized rubber. It's quite thin. It's got a little air pocket on the underside to ventilate the wrist. Throw it on the wrist. It is super comfortable, suitable for a wrist as small as 14 centimeters on these lugs. Though make no mistake, there is a shorter set of lugs available at the factory that can be swapped out for no charge if you want an even smaller wrist fit. I got to admit, I don't understand why these aren't hotter on the market right now, because for the first watch from a celebrated independent and a pioneering independent, the Greubel Forsey double tourbillon 30 degree is a real buy. Now, just recently, we had an FP Journe Jade tourbillon, and the price on that, I think, was over $1 million. Well, for about a quarter of that, you could have this, the first watch from Robert Greubel and Stephen Forsey with their first fundamental innovation. This watch includes two tourbillon regulators. Let me get the hands out of the way so you can get the full benefit of this view. But we have one tourbillon with a serpentine quad spoke, and that tourbillon, the outer tourbillon, makes one circuit every 4 minutes. The other tourbillon that's inside is canted at 30 degrees, and as the balance rotates, the tourbillon cage around it rotates in 1 minute circuits. So you have a 1 minute tourbillon angled at 30 degrees inside a 4 minute tourbillon. The idea being that even when you just leave it on the table, the balance wheel is rotating at an angle and rotating in circles, and that multi-axis rotation helps to even out the effect of gravity on the escapement and the balance. And that was the original purpose Abraham Louis Breguet had in inventing the tourbillon. It made sense in a pocket watch that just sits upright like this and it pivots with its axis perpendicular to gravity. Well, in a wristwatch, you don't really know what the angle is going to be. So Greubel and Forsey decided that the best tourbillon would be a randomly tumbling tourbillon to help even out the effects of gravity. At times it would gain, at times it would lose. That would hopefully net zero. And at the very least, on your dresser at night, it does continuously even out the error that gravity induces on the movement. Now, it's beautifully finished. The dial's made of solid gold. You could see that the tourbillon carriage has been entirely black polished, and so is the bridge, which has been rounded all the way and then black polished on its top. We have blued steel components for the dial side bolts, the hands, as well as the serpentine for the tourbillon. There is a free-sprung architecture. It does use an overcoil. Flip it all over, and it's like looking at a vintage pocket watch. The bridges are frosted using a wire brush method, which is very traditional. You can also see that the underside of the tourbillon is as spectacularly finished as the top, and despite being a power-intensive thing, it does have 3 days of power reserve. The power reserve scale is actually white gold and then inked. Take a quick look at the case back. You can see that it has lovely gilt-coated bridges, and note that the main plate has satination, brushed satination, compared to the frosting of the bridges. We have jewels set in golden chaton once again, and then you can see multiple mainspring barrels keeping this big machine rolling. You can also see that there's a chaton fixing the underside of the tourbillon. The underside of the tourbillon bridge features a little gold chaton set. A watch that exhausts superlatives. This was back when Greubel Forsey was only making a few dozen watches per year. Even now, they only make 120 to 150 a year. So exclusivity is assured. Remember, Journe is going to make approximately 6 times that per year. So this is a watch that represents outstanding innovation in watchmaking, best in the world finish, and at 43.5 millimeters, this is actually one of the more wearable Greubel Forsey watches. You can see there's a playfulness in Robert Greubel's design language externally as we have this oscillation, this little wave representing the oscillation of the regulator inside, and lovely concave profiles to the lugs. There's a good deal of nuance in this watch. Though it's large, there's something thoughtful covering every square millimeter of this superlative timepiece. And a rare opportunity to get into an important independent and one of their most important watches at a price that is crazy. I mean, $250,000 watches are crazy, but relative to what else is out there, this is a good buy. That said, a lot of folks object to the size of Greubel Forsey and the complexity, and this is a great Greubel Forsey for those folks. If you're coming from something safe like a Moser Endeavor or an FP Journe Chronograph or a Chronomètre Souverain, if you're coming from something like a Chronomètre Bleu, if you're coming from something that may have hailed from another brand like Grunefeld or Voudelainen, and you're ready to move into the world of Greubel Forsey, but you don't want to abandon your taste in aesthetics, this is the one for you. The Greubel Forsey Signature 1 by Didier Cretin. He's an in-house watchmaker at Greubel Forsey who was given carte blanche to create his idea of the ultimate watch. Now this timepiece right here is 41.4 millimeters in platinum 950, and you can see it's actually my favorite serial number, 11. 11 and multiples 11 are my lucky number. So this one is 11 of 11. Now it's got an enormous balance. It's very simple. It's a 3-hand watch, 1, 2, 3. The dial's made of gold, and then it's sort of nickel anthracite coated. We have a full balance bridge of extraordinary span with a huge balance wheel, which I believe is about 14 millimeters. It's free sprung. It has an overcoil. The bridge is not just black polish, but you can see it's actually faceted on its sides. The sharp angles where the bevels meet the anchors, 1, 2, 3, 4, are then paired with 5, 6, 7, 8 additional sharp creases. So we have 8 sharp interior angles on the balance bridge alone. It beats weight at an aesthetically pleasing and traditional 18,000 vibrations per hour. And you can see an enormously complex click mechanism underneath the barrel on the reverse side, 54 hours of power reserve. Take a look at all that black polish. Even the ratcheting mechanism has been decorated. The bridges feature that satin finish for which Greubel Forsey is well known. This is a model that came out in 2017. It was the follow-up to the 2016 Signature 1. And you can see that the case back has been engraved manually. Edition unique, and ons. And then we have a lovely frosting on the bridges, and you can see once again those wheels that are internally beveled. Truly impressive stuff. A great deal of attention to detail lavished on this watch. It is no less a Greubel Forsey for its simplicity and its ergonomic excellence. And I'm going to throw it on my wrist. The Signature 1 is a great alternative again, not just to some of the more mainstream independents, but this is something you could get into in lieu of Audemars Piguet, Lange, Vacheron, and Patek. Truly an alternative to those. This is held to a higher standard, right down to the quality of the screws. If you look closely, these screws top their screws. And you can see there's a nice use of Côte de Genève on this ring around the underside of the dial. Just a lot of thoughtful details. Though a simple watch, it's complex in its nuances, and you will continue to find reasons to love this watch the deeper you dig and the longer you own it. Let's jump back to sports watches for a second. This is a great example. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms bathyscaphe, 43.2 millimeters in ceramic. This is the way to get it, because I hate scratches. I hate refinishing. I hate having to guess whether my pre-owned watch has ever been refinished. To me, this is perfect, because most people will never scratch a sapphire crystal, which means they will never mark a ceramic case. If you're not one to just shatter the crystal on your watches, you're going to find ceramic is an ageless material for you. And it's light, it's hypoallergenic, and it ensures that your watch has a cool resiliency to match its luxury. The watch will not get scratched by your cuff. It will not get scuffed by your car door. It will not get scuffed by drywall or sheetrock if you happen to come in contact with the walls of your home or office. And it's small enough, being the bathyscaphe as opposed to the larger 5015. This is the reference 5000, that you can wear it on a smaller wrist. Lug to lug, it's shorter and it's thinner in profile to the point that it's actually fitting underneath my cuff. Technically speaking, it's identical to the 5015. You get the same movement. This is caliber a 1315. It's a little bit muted underneath a somewhat superfluous case back protection sticker, but you can see that the bevels are a mile wide, and that's something you don't get on the Royal Oak Offshore Diver. You can also see there's a lovely satin graining across the bridges rather than the cliched Côte de Genève. The bevels really are a mile wide. You can see the same treatment's been lavished on all of the jewel sinks. The screw heads are polished, they're chamfered. You have a free sprung balance with a silicone anti-magnetic hairspring, 5 days of power reserve courtesy of 3 mainspring barrels, so it really goes above and beyond. Let's hear the bezel. It's a very subtle bezel. It's not the loud click and clack of a Panerai submersible, nor is it the combination of crisp and smooth that you get with a Rolex. This is a much more slick, understated, muted, almost over-refined kind of bezel ratchet. This is Blancpain's ideal of what a luxury dive bezel should feel like and sound like. But what I can tell you is that it is 120 click and it has a ceramic insert. Let's take a look at the lume shot. And there you can see the dial, plenty of luminescence. One of my favorite features of this watch, it has a sailcloth strap, by the way, basically a strap for life. These are pretty much indestructible. It has a ceramic pin and buckle, and this is where a lot of companies, Hublot, I'm looking at you, are going to cheat and use some sort of black-coated titanium or steel part. This is also ceramic, so when this thing is buckled on your wrist and your wrist is scraping your desk, that ceramic buckle is going to stay sharp because it too has the hardness of the case. Here's a bit of an odd watch. It came out in 2019, but Audemars Piguet pretty much, I don't want to say disowned it, but soft pedaled it. This is the reference 26480 Ti. It was a prototype in production form, which is to say they were testing the waters for future designs in the Royal Oak collection. And in 2021, we saw this dial design adopted for the new 43mm watches. So this was sort of a test balloon to see how people would buy a symmetrical, bilaterally symmetrical triple register chronograph. We also had that new chronograph pusher style, not quite rectangular, but elongated, faceted, and integrated into a broad set of shear guards and shoulders. So we have the chronograph pushers remodeled, and we have an integrated watch here, as this was another one of the concepts. They were testing a layout for life after the modular chronographs. As you can see, the crown here and the pushers are in the same plane. Normally, on the modular chronographs, the original Royal Oak offshores, you would have the pushers higher than the crown because the chronograph module would be on top. Well, of course, AP later developed their own in-house caliber, the 4401, to use in chronographs, but this is a Frederic Piguet 1185. As a result, you can see the date is flush with the dial, and in the modular era, that used to be the hallmark of a counterfeit Royal Oak offshore. But when we're talking about an integrated movement, the chronograph and the date are going to be more or less on the same plane rather than different parts of the watch stacked on top of each other. We have a Mega Tapisserie dial with a wonderful gloss slate blue. We have a hour track featuring lovely faceted rhodium-coated hour indices, and we will check out the lume shot because this watch is quite well loomed. And because of the Frederic Piguet movement, it's only 12.8 millimeters thick. It's still 100 meters water resistant, so you can take it swimming, and it's got an AP factory rubber strap on it. Technically, it's a 42 millimeter model, but I'll be honest, it seems a little bit larger than that. That is the way with Royal Oaks and offshores. That said, on my wrist, 16 centimeters circumference, it fits well, and you can see how flat it is. It's only about 0.5 millimeter thicker than a Rolex Daytona, just to give you a ballpark estimate. The timepiece also includes the Frederic Piguet 1185's best underlying features, including a thin profile, fine finishing, a crisp column wheel, and a precise vertical clutch for engagement. So this is a watch that will be remembered as historically important in AP history. They launched it in 2019 at SIHH, and then they basically recalled all of the press kits. They didn't want people talking about it. They didn't want to give the press time to photograph and write about it. It was pretty much just between AP and a few good clients. And this watch was pretty much the progenitor of every future family of Royal Oak Offshores. Not every family will adopt this symmetrical dial, but you will see integrated chronograph calibers, thinner profiles, and probably eventually all of them will adopt something like this crown guard profile. And I would be shocked if they stick with the 12, 9, and 6 registers forever on every model. This is really the wave of the future and the first sign that that wave was coming. Oh, by the way, just in case I didn't mention, grade 5 titanium, very light. Also in grade 5 titanium, and even thinner at under 12 millimeters thick, this is the second generation of the Bethune DB27 Titan Hawk. We have a lovely salmon dial with blue printing. You can see that the hands feature fired blue titanium tips, and there's center seconds. Now, this is a great watch for folks who want to get into de Bethune. Maybe you like their engineering, their standards for watchmaking, the exclusivity, Denis Flageolet and his no-nonsense engineer's persona. Well, that's all great, but a lot of folks are a little bit alienated by stuff like this. And while I like this, some folks feel more comfortable with a more conservative design, and the DB27 Titan Hawk is that. They make their own cases, dials, and movements in-house at de Bethune, so all of this has been done under the same roof as this and to the same standards. What you get here is a dial with their microlight engraving. That's their alternative to guilloche, but they do it with reduction, so they remove the material. It's not a stamped process. They have the same floating lugs that you no doubt noted on the DB28. You get their ergonomic benefit here. You can see the case also features engraving on its side, microlight. It is very thin at under 12 millimeters thick. This is 11.8. It's an automatic winder, and you can see on the reverse side that it is an automatic winder with a full balance bridge. It is a wonderful 60-hour power reserve that is set it and forget it accurate and shock resistant, highly refined, focused on chronometry, and it's one of those watches you can just put on every day with a smile. If you want to take it off for a day, again, with 60 hours of power reserve, that's not really a problem. It has an enormous rotor with a heavy mass, so it's a very efficient winder. Throw it on the wrist, it's extremely comfortable, and it's uncharacteristically colorful for a de Bethune watch. Now, color is not alien to the brand, but it's usually use of blues and purples, whereas here we have a combination of silver, blue, and salmon that's wonderfully fetching, and this is their entry-level model. So if you want to get into the brand, this 40mm titanium DB27 Titan Hawk V2 is going to be right up your alley. And this is where we finish with a big bang. No, not an oobleau. We have a cataclysmic explosion of watchmaking richness here. 42 millimeters. You can see this is the Lange 1 Tourbillon perpetual calendar. Very few watches offer what this watch offers. We have a perpetual calendar with a retrograding day, a double-digit date, a solid gold moon phase disc in white gold, a dial that is galvanized sterling silver, and then it's galvanized this gray color. We have a pusher adjuster on the flank that adjusts everything. The day, the date, the moon phase, the month, even if necessary, the leap year. So if the watch falls behind, say, 4 days and stops, you just toggle it 4 times and everything jumps back up. There is an AM/PM indicator or day-night indicator underneath the hour and minute hands. And you can see there is a radially arrayed orbiting month display. Now taking a look at the case back, automatic winding with a 50-hour power reserve. You can see that the timepiece features a 21-karat gold rotor attached to a platinum mass. So the rotor itself is gold. The mass is platinum, double precious metal. And you'll note anglage, satination, and chiseling. 3 different finishes on the rotor, plus both black polished pegs and blued screws holding the assembly together with a black polished center, 2 freehand engraved half bridges underpinning the tourbillon. And take note, the tourbillon features hacking seconds. The tourbillon's also free sprung with an overcoil, though you can't quite see that set of features easily underneath the bridges. If you note the capstone on the underside of the tourbillon fixed in a screw-held chaton, no less, that capstone is a cut diamond. So while the rubies are synthetic rubies, that diamond is the real thing. And this watch was a limited edition of 100 pieces. This is number 11. Once again, my lucky number. Note the use of German silver bridges and plates. That has a golden hue because of the use of copper in the nickel copper zinc alloy that makes up German silver. You can see not one, not two, but 3 different sizes of engine turning or perlage here. We have both black polished and fired blued screws. We have glasuta stripes laid down with abrasive wheel across the bridges, and many golden chaton held in place by blued screws. We also have, if you look carefully, mirrored anglage on the edge of the bridges. So Lange with just an embarrassment of wealth, automatic winding, perpetual calendar, retrograde, tourbillon with stop seconds. And we'll throw this on the wrist because this is a special piece. All in platinum, it feels massive, but it looks the part, even on a smaller wrist, and I can recommend it for a 14-centimeter circumference wrist. It is a dress watch, and unlike many Lange complications, it's not excessively thick. This is the ultimate in haute de gamme engineering and finish. Reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com, for purchase and pricing details.